Everything's good.
Everything's good. That'll be the next podcast. But today, let's do this.
Let's do this, baby. So, this is technically episode 3. I figured we would start by just updating everybody what we've been up to. We mentioned a couple things we were going to go do in one of the podcasts. And I figured we'd give a little recap of how our evening, our date night at Sturbridge Village went.
Let's do this.
Let's do this, baby.
Yeah, baby.
And then we'll move on to the actual topic for today.
Of which I have no idea, yet again, what it's going to be. But I'm sure it's going to be awesome.
Which I like this.
I do too.
I also, even though I'm thinking up the topics and doing a little bit of research in advance, I'm not pre-thinking. So we're kind of on the same playing field. I'm just thinking of the concepts. But it really is ad lib or whatever the word is.
Yeah.
But yeah, let's talk about Sturbridge Village, baby. What was your favorite part?
My favorite part was... I'm going to be super mushy as I always am.
What did your dad call us? Goody two shoes yesterday?
Goody two shoes, yeah. I loved holding hands and walking around during twilight hours and seeing the beautiful candlelit walkways and all the Christmas lights out and all the different colonial buildings from the 1800s. And it was just very romantic and very festive and just felt really close to you and really present. And we smiled a lot and had a wonderful time.
Yes, agreed. I think it gave me that fuzzy feeling that you want to feel during the holiday season while you're on a date. It almost felt like I was in a Hallmark movie. And the extra detail that Sturbridge Village puts into everything. Nothing is halfway done. Everything is beautifully done, well thought through. You still feel like you're in colonial times. I think it was 1885 or something they were saying.
Yeah.
But it's still modern in the sense that there's enough light for you to be able to see, but it is literally a wax candle lit path. And we got there. I remember
when you noticed the candles and you're like, wait a minute, those are real.
Yes. And the other part to it is because they were real, it smelled authentic and sort of just that like warm and fuzzy romantic feeling that you want to feel during this time of the year or any time of the year really, but especially when it's a little bit chilly outside, but it was also still comfortable.
It was.
And the other part that made it really sweet for me was the open fires. They had like campfires every so often throughout the village. And it was nice to just pause for a second and sit there and enjoy it, watch the fire.
Yeah, they were just beautifully stoked fires that were throwing off a lot of heat and benches set in a circle, and you just nestle in and
it was
hear
so
the fire
pleasant.
crackle. It was so nice. Yeah, I loved it.
And then my second most favorite part was...
Horses?
Well, the horses were amazing.
Okay.
You know, I kind of like leave the horses to the side, I think, just because that's always probably my most favorite part. But there were horse-drawn carriages with actual horses. Absolutely gorgeous. Also very well thought through how they had the line set up and plenty of people could get on at once. So the line wasn't very long. And it was just very pleasant. I mean, it was just so sweet, and the sounds and the smells and everything that you would typically, I guess what they smelled and felt then in 1885. That's what I imagine it to be like. And we'll talk about this on a different podcast, but leading up to Jonathan and I connecting, I had been starting to read a bunch of romance novels because I've never really been like a lovey-dovey person. And I wanted to catch that feeling. I read like Regency, clean, nice, sometimes Christian romance novels. And they all take place between like 1850 or so and like 1920 or something like that. So I imagine pre-electricity, that's the vibe they're trying to go for at the village.
So what you're saying is it felt like we were in our own romance novel the other night.
Yes, I said it was like a Hallmark movie. My second most favorite part, beyond just the
romanticism.
Yeah. Was the wishes on the tree.
Oh, yeah?
So there was a bridge. It was well lit. That was like electricity so that people could see. And they had all these Christmas trees, perfectly groomed Christmas trees, we realized, set up. And then there were these little like notes on the trees, and we walk up and we're like, oh, what is this? And there's a bunch of different people there looking at the notes as well. And then we figured out that they were wishes. The most adorable wish we saw was in little kids writing, and it said, "I would like a cat." I think it was really meant to be like your Christmas list.
Yeah.
But then we filled out our own wishes, but we didn't tell each other what they were. So that was really a cool part too.
Indeed. Has yours come true yet?
Not yet. Has yours?
Mine either.
Yours hasn't come true yet?
No.
Oh, geez. It's only been a couple days. We should.
Yeah.
But yeah, it was such a great evening and such a great place.
It was.
I've always wanted to go to it. So this is another dream come true. You made it a dream come true for me.
Thanks, baby. It was
Yeah.
my pleasure.
And it was
My
really
honor.
romantic and
It
fun.
really was.
And it was a perfect temperature, not too cold, not too hot. It was comfortable in our coats and your sweater. So it was really nice.
Highly recommended.
Highly recommend it. Yeah. Another thing we did was we posted a little highlight reel of our shenanigans at the Big E.
The Biggie Extravaganza of Jonathan and Rose 2023.
So if you saw anything in that little highlight reel that you liked, feel free to comment down below and ask us about it. And we will elaborate on any of the stories, including the horses that we saw there. Jonathan's ride down the big slide, which I disappointed him by not doing it myself.
And you can make up for it next year when you go headfirst down that thing.
Well, the funny part was we tried to go back. We went to the Big E multiple times this year. We tried to go back so I would get on the slide because I was willing to. However, every time we went back, it was closed.
Yeah.
The ride was closed.
Yeah, there's weather. It was rainy.
But yes, if you see anything in the highlight reel you want us to cover, we could give a review of the food, the rides, the state houses. If you want us to elaborate on anything at all, we will.
My favorite part was when Rose was shooting the bubble gun.
Yes.
Yes.
That's in the highlight reel. I added it in there.
I appreciated that.
I couldn't miss that part. I also included a brief photo of my elephant necklace
You did.
so that people could see that when they watched the other podcast that we filmed.
Absolutely.
So everything is included there. Anything else you wanted to cover from the past few days?
I am excited to see what you got planned for tonight.
All right. It turns a little serious tonight.
Okay.
Okay. So the first question I have for you related to the topic for tonight, we're not going to say who, but you're going to think of who you go to advice for the most. I would encourage our audience, our listeners, to also think about when you need advice, who do you go to first? You don't need to say it out loud. I don't think that would be fair.
Okay.
But maybe it's the internet for some people.
Could be.
Maybe
Dr.
it's
Google.
Maybe it's a romance novel or a character that they've met along the way, right? I think a lot of people actually find more comfort in characters that they've met in fictional works.
What would so-and-so do?
Yes.
Yeah.
Maybe it's the Bible.
Higher power.
Higher power, yep. And maybe it's a person that you have in your life. Okay. So the first question I have for you, once you've thought that person up, and likewise, I'll have to do this as well, is why? What about that individual or source or place that you go for advice, why do you select that?
Okay.
Okay.
Yeah.
Do you have your person?
I do.
Okay. Why do you go to that person?
Because they tell it as it is, and they're also a critical thinker and very balanced in terms of being able to consider things from multiple angles. Highly intelligent, but also emotionally intelligent as well. So can understand the intellect side, but can also understand the more human side of things as well. And so I find that person's perspective to be extremely helpful and valuable when I consult with them.
Nice, baby. So it's interesting because as I was just literally thinking through this right now, I thought about over the years, some of the best advice I've ever gotten. And then the moments where I turned either away from that person because I didn't want to hear what they had to say.
Yeah.
You know, because sometimes
We've
when
all
you
been
go to a particular person for advice, maybe they do tell it like it is. And sometimes that's hard to hear. And then I thought about the times where I relied heavily on the internet or the Bible or people I looked up to that I didn't know type of thing.
Yeah.
In the sense of what we were saying earlier of what would this person do per se. So then I thought, well, nowadays I go to the person who, like you said, tells it like it is, doesn't sugarcoat anything, understands me and sees me for who I really am. So isn't coming from a place of where they're giving me advice based on what they would do, but they know me well enough to understand my personality to say, okay, this is what this person actually needs to hear, not a generic piece of advice per se. Okay. And I think that sort of tough love type of thing is usually the better advice. Do you agree with that?
I do in general. I think it's also very situational, right? Because I find it's helpful when somebody, or even myself, is explicit about what you're looking for in a conversation. Are you seeking advice? And if you are, being very clear about, hey, this is what I'm going through, this is what I'm considering, here's where I'm stuck. I would value your advice versus I just need to talk something out loud and be heard and be validated. It's two very different situations, right? Because you may not be ready for advice. I think we've all been there where someone's like ramming advice down your throat when you're like still trying to just process something yourself and you're more needing a soundboard. So I forgot what the question was at this point in time, but that's my answer.
Yeah, exactly. I agree. I think being explicit as the person asking for advice, or when you need to vent, or when you're just excited about something. I mean, there was something Jonathan and I were working on earlier this year, and we sort of said it out loud and got advice that we weren't asking for in a way. And we were a little bit surprised of the response. We went into the situation thinking that it was going to be just pure excitement, and it was more like worry and fear dipped in. So I do think, but at the same time, it was good advice. I mean, I think that's the other part.
Yeah, the person had our best interests at heart.
Exactly, yeah. And I think that's the other part that I wanted to cover here before we go into the next part of this, is basically through the lens, think about that through the lens of the exercise we're about to do. Because I think in any of the situations that we're about to discuss, it's one of those things where this isn't a one size fits all. And most likely when we go through these, it's going to conjure certain situations that we've probably already been through up. And that is very different than somebody who might be watching this and being like, oh, let me make a very important decision based on what these people said. We're just on the internet. You can take our advice or leave it.
We're not qualified advice givers.
Unless we know you in person.
Yeah.
So ready for the next part?
Yeah, let's bring it on.
Okay, so this next part is going to be some advice, some generalized advice from the internet. Some things that you've probably come across as little like Pinterest quotes. And it's like, don't do this, do this. And we're going to do a little analytical dissection. Ooh,
that's my wheelhouse.
Okay, the first concept, advice. Are you ready for this? This was something, I believe this was on Pinterest where I found it. I kind of curated these for our discussion tonight. Okay. Surround yourself with people who hold you to a higher standard than you hold yourself.
Okay. So my reflections on this advice. I have mixed feelings about it. So on the one hand, I think the spirit behind this, the 5 people you spend the most time around, you start to become like, so be careful and mindful about who you surround yourself with, and, surrounding yourself with people that have high standards, if that's important to you, that makes sense, right? So from that perspective, I get it and what it's driving home at, and I agree with that in isolation. However, what I don't like about it is it sort of takes the responsibility away from the individual to raise their own standards, and also to lead and elevate the standards of those around them as well. So I think it's not an either or, it's a both and. So I think I like the intent of the advice, but I think there's a cautionary tale there around you got to do the work yourself, and you have to have your own standards, and you have to set those and lead as well.
Yeah, I love that reflection. I think this one was difficult for me as well because, first of all, it's an uncomfortable one. If you're surrounding yourself with people that are holding you at a higher standard than you hold yourself, then inherently, like you're saying, there's something wrong with the standard you're holding yourself to. I think both of us, and the reason why I picked this one, we hold ourselves at a very high standard beyond what we hold the people around us. We hold each other and ourselves to a higher standard than how we hold anybody else in our life. Like, I don't have those types of expectations for my friends.
Yeah, exactly.
I don't. However, I will say that if I notice my friends drifting from who they truly are, or even my employees not living up to their potential, then I'll have a serious conversation that needs to be had sometimes. I think as a couple, it's different. Like I would expect you to hold me to a high standard. I want you to, because otherwise it just feels like some free pass.
Yeah.
And I also think that the person that you spend the most time with, that you kind of get this backdoor pass to, which we were talking about the other day, it is a different type of relationship. But I can't possibly hold someone I don't spend that much time with to a standard that I don't know what's going on in their world or their life in totality, right? Yeah. And the other part is sometimes you just want to have fun. Like sometimes you don't want this like strictness in life.
Because the other thought that was going through my mind as well, which is, I'll just use my hobby and passion as an example. So if you're hanging out with other musicians or guitarists in this case, it's great to hang out with folks that are a level or two above your capability and you learn from them. However, if you're maybe a beginner and you're hanging out with somebody who's advanced, you can hang out in a context of being friends or whatever, but in the context of hoping to learn something, like the gap may be too big there. You know, it might not be helpful. It may be discouraging. You might actually find that it's harder to relate to what to do next. So, it's very situational, I think, as most things are in life.
Yeah, I agree. I liked this one, though. I like this one to start it off.
Me too.
You ready for the next one?
Mm-hmm. Let's do this.
Let's do this, baby.
Baby.
Okay. Ready for the second one?
I'm ready.
Being consistent is more important than being perfect.
This one I'm going to agree with. And I'm thinking about the importance of consistent effort over time and how that can really make a difference, and the discipline to follow through and to develop and progress on goals and smaller goals that lead to bigger goals. And so I think that anybody that's achieved any level of accomplishment or success in sports or school or career or hobbies, you're not born with it. There's a lot of myths about that stuff. Like Mozart was a prodigy. Well, he started composing at a very young age, and I believe his father was like a very excellent music teacher. So he had all the right environment and conditions and put the 10,000 hours in by the time he was a teenager and he was composing masterpieces. So I think the consistency is so important there. I think the caveat with this one is, if anyone's familiar with the concept of deliberate practice, you need to be practicing the right things so that the consistent effort does pay off and drive progression. Because if you're consistently practicing the wrong things, you may not move forward toward achieving your goal. So there is a caveat with this one too, which it seems like these are sort of forcing a little bit of that tension, which I really like. Yeah, what do you think?
Yeah, this one was hard for me because I agree that consistency is 100% important. And I, unfortunately, didn't grow up understanding like practice. There's that Allen Iverson. I don't know if you've ever seen that, where he talks about, he's like, it's just practice. I miss practice. But I wish that someone had told me that not everybody was born with it. When you said that, it kind of hit a chord with me, because I'm like, oh yeah, I didn't grow up believing that. Like, I didn't understand that people that were good at things, it's because they practice. I thought people just either were naturally born with some sort of talent or they weren't. And I was very confused about my own talents. Later in life, when I started deliberately, like you're saying, working on a specific skill set or talent, the consistency came over time versus trying to hold myself to some sort of standard where I was perfect the first time. And one of the things that I was reading when I read this particular quote was the reason why it's important to be consistent over perfection is because you may never release it. You may never release whatever you're working on if you expect it to be perfect. So it's a situation that very much like you described, where being consistent but also expecting improvement is what's important. We could go to the gym every day consistently and never improve or be doing the wrong form or something like that. And that's not as good as being perfect, right? So it's almost like you have to strive for more while being consistent. It's not enough to just show up every day.
Yeah, I agree. It's an interesting one too, because growing up as a perfectionist, I think there's also a tendency when you're in that mindset to overthink things and overplan things, whereas sometimes taking action in order to get experience and refine your plan and iterate and move forward can get you there faster than trying to mastermind the whole thing and perfect it on the first go, and that's something I learned through experience and wisdom as well.
This went on to say, basically, perfectionism is the enemy of progress. Okay. And then I just wrote, you can be consistently mediocre. And that's like my worst fear.
Yeah, agree.
Along with drowning.
It's fascinating too for anybody that's in the arts, particularly music or even musical production and mix engineering and things. Art is so subjective. It's like, when is a piece of art finished? Mm-hmm. You could sit there and try to perfect that piece of art literally forever. Right. And so there's something fascinating about being able to just be confident enough to say, when is it done versus when is it perfect?
Yes. So this reminded me just now, Rick Rubin audiobook that we've been listening to, where he does also say, though, that don't release it before you feel it or something like that. There was something to it of not necessarily making it perfect, but keep working on it until it feels finished or something like that. And then the last note I wrote on this was more toward the perfectionist side. And I wrote, I'd rather strive for the moon and fall amongst the stars than just consistently reach for the stars. Then you'll get there, and then what?
I like it.
Okay, you ready for
You'll look back at the pale blue dot and appreciate how small everything is, and it's all about the meaning we put to it.
Yeah, agreed.
I'm reminded of Carl Sagan, The Cosmos.
Yes,
He's got that whole blurb about
I got
the
that
pale
reference.
blue dot. Yeah. Carl Sagan has some special meaning for Rose and I.
Carl Sagan might actually be Jonathan's dad.
Yes.
We'll have to ask your mom the next time we see her.
Paternity test pending.
We're just kidding. Okay. The next one I wrote about, or the next one I wrote down, is be the change you seek in the world. I'm going to re-record that.
Okay.
I didn't like the way it came out.
Still going, so
I'm
do
a
it.
perfectionist.
Perfect in my eyes.
Okay, the next one, concept 3 that we're going to talk about today, is the quote, be the change you seek to see in the world. And this has also been phrased, don't expect to see a change if you don't make one. Some of the thoughts I had with this one was, this puts a lot of weight on a single person's shoulders. However, I find great comfort in this. And when I started to put this into some sort of work and action in my daily life, it changed the world. I lived it. When I showed up how I would want to be treated, not necessarily in a way that it was fake, but when I just started being more personable and saying hi to people and didn't have the expectation of anything in return, it changed my interaction with the world. And I used to travel even more than I travel now. So I was coming into contact with, I wouldn't say the general public, but I was coming into contact with a lot of people in a stressful travel situation. So before I started doing this, I sat down and thought, okay, what would I want to experience? I want to experience a friendly environment, not necessarily where people are telling me their life story, which is what I got, but where I could be comfortable and sort of just be, if you will, you know, and it definitely changed my world, especially in the airport.
Yeah, I can totally see that. And I have to first start out by saying there's an excellent blog and YouTube video on the subject.
I forgot I wrote a blog on this.
Go to Bright Eyed Smiles and read all about it. So I feel like I've got a really well-informed point of view on this now. But no, from personal experience, I can totally relate to this. The example that came through my mind, you know, growing up, I was very shy, painfully shy in some cases. And I think going through adolescence and early teenage years and things, I wanted to connect with people. I wanted to be social. I wanted to interact. And I had a few close friends always, and played sports and was active in that sense, and got along with all the different social groups in school and things. And however, there was times that I would feel down about it, like, oh, you know, why don't people talk to me more? And then you realize over time, it is this like what you put out there is what you get back dynamic, right? Where some signal I was sending was closed off and probably not as easy for people to open up. Or conversely, I could have initiated more conversations or initiated more social interactions that could have then led to more possibilities, right? So back to your point around being the change you want to see. So from personal experience, I can totally relate to that. And of course, going through my own personal growth journey, and you learn how to do that in your own authentic way by being the change that you want.
Yes, that just prompted a thought in my mind about a book I read probably about 10 years ago. And at the time, I was traveling a ton for work. a different job. And I was reading a book called Nurture by Lisa Brevere. I think that's how you say her last name. We can link it. It's a beautiful, beautiful book. I have it in every format that's possible, I think, and in multiple, I think I have multiple copies of it just because I loved it so much. But I believe it was in that book where she talks about potentially someone being shy, especially a woman. I mean, I think this is the other part too that I was thinking and why this prompted it, because you had your experience as a young boy, right? There are many people, especially now, that are depressed. Like, I think I was reading some sort of a study that was done that this generation of children who are now just turning 18 are the most anxious and depressed. Like, they have the most diagnoses for those things. It's not just in their head or whatever. It's like true.
I've seen some research on this as well.
And with that comes sometimes social anxiety and things like this. And unfortunately, at this point in time in the world, because we're just more isolated than ever before, is what the study was basically showing. I'll try to find the study so we can link it as well. One of the questions in the book was, well, what if I feel socially awkward? Or what if I walk into the room and nobody talks to me? These are fears that are very natural. I mean, it's a natural human reaction.
Human need, right? Everyone wants to be accepted and seen and heard and
yes.
connect.
So in the book, the author, Lisa, she goes through and she basically says, be the person that is open and talkative, even if it takes figuring it out beforehand, what, you know, the 3 things that you might talk about when you walk into the room. It doesn't come naturally to everybody, and that's perfectly fine. But if you can find the person in the room that looks like they might want somebody to talk to, then find them and talk to them. And it really changed my perspective on things. I mean, I was also very shy as a child, but overcame that. I don't even know when. I couldn't tell you when it changed, but
when
definitely
you became the change you wanted to see.
That came later. But no, I think I've always been sort of, maybe when I moved to the South, I just became a more talkative person and like, oh, people actually want to say hi and it is genuine. Some people think it's fake. It's not. But when I realized it's like, okay, people have really interesting stories as well. Anyway, so I read that book about 10 years ago and it really hit home for me. And then I thought, okay, I'm going to be that person. And then later I truly said, okay, I want my regular travel life to be less miserable, and just tried to make it better as best as I could.
Yeah, and you can do a whole podcast on some of the travel stories you have of the people you've met. I could do a whole blog remembering the stories you shared to me.
I do meet quite a few people and I do love it. I genuinely started to enjoy also meeting different people, hearing their stories, understanding where they might have some sort of struggle, and even just being a simple comfort. I remember one time traveling on the way home and there was a younger girl, probably college age or whatever, and she was crying. It broke my heart. I just wanted to take her home, you know? But it was like just being able to offer her tissue. I mean, those are the types of things where most people are just completely ignoring this poor girl. She's like literally crying her eyes out in the airport. Now, I don't know what happened. She didn't open up to me, but just being able to be like, here's a tissue and I care. Another human interaction was, you know, if she wanted to, she could have opened up to me. But
yeah, no, that was very sweet. Side question.
Yes.
When somebody's upset, crying, should you hand them a tissue or should you not hand them a tissue?
I think the right thing to do is to hand them a tissue.
I always thought that to be true as well. And then I was told, and this is somebody from a psychological therapy background, they're trained as therapists, and this might be in a clinical practice setting, so this might be the explanation. They're actually trained when they're having a session with somebody and somebody gets upset and emotional and crying, not to provide them a tissue, because that sends a signal of it's not okay for them to cry, or it might be invalidating their feelings.
What? Who told you this?
A therapist, a licensed therapist, that was part of the schooling they went through. And the reason he was sharing it was because it is kind of a counterintuitive thing, and whether it's right or wrong, I don't know. But I found that fascinating because
I think maybe your
let's get some comments down below on what people think about this one.
Well, this is the thing. There's a biological need for a tissue when you're crying.
Yeah.
There's a lot of liquids involved. Interesting.
It's interesting.
I don't see it that way.
Yeah.
If I'm crying, I would prefer my therapist. We've both been to therapy. My therapist would always just hand me the box. If I didn't have a tissue,
they went to different schools.
Well, also, I think I'm thinking this through as we're talking.
Yeah.
I think it's very different for someone who's wearing mascara.
Oh yeah, first practical need. Here.
There's a literal practical need
Yeah.
for a tissue at some point in time when someone's upset. And this girl needed a tissue.
Oh, I think it was very sweet of you.
Yes.
Yes.
Okay. You ready for the next one?
I am ready. Let's do this.
This is the fourth and last one.
All right.
Don't judge each day by the harvest you reap, but by the seeds you plant. I think this is actually a Bible verse, maybe a proverb or something like that.
You know, I have mixed feelings on this one too, and I think that's by design, right? But I like the notion like the work is never done, right? Like you can't ever rest on your laurels, and there's always something to do to learn more, to grow more, to keep living life and moving forward. And so that's where the seeds you sow bit sort of is really resonant there. But there's also about celebrating moments of just feeling good or accomplishing something or a milestone and taking time out to enjoy all the hard work that went into planting those seeds, right? So I think it's a both and. I don't know that there's a formula in terms of what the right balance is, but I think they both have their time and place for sure.
Yeah, as you were saying that, I kind of changed my mind on this one.
Interesting.
Because I really have always liked this. Like, oh, what can I do today to provide for my future? And you know that I'm always thinking about the future.
Yeah, you're a very good planner.
But I'm also not very good at celebrating when I've achieved something. I think about my career even, and it's just like, oh, I get to this level or I achieve something massive, and I might let myself think about it for 10 seconds before I'm on to the literal next thing of like, okay, now what's the next step? I think what this particular quote is saying is basically don't judge the day by what showed up that day, but judge the day by what you were able to do. Be as productive as possible, plan for the future, keep planting your seeds. Don't constantly dig up your seeds and look at them to see the progress, because that's also not the point.
Yeah.
But I agree with you. There's something to the fact that you, at some point, you need to celebrate when there is the harvest and the reaping.
Yeah, take a moment and share that with somebody that you enjoy as well, right? It's interesting because you're really good at acknowledging those moments for me in my life and encouraging those. And when I'm approaching a certain goal, whether it's X amount of subs on my YouTube channel or something, you're like, how do you feel about that? You're about to do it, you know, and you're really excited about it for me. And that feels amazing from where I sit. Also, when I try to do that for you, I see where
like,
you're just kind of like, keep going, more to do, you know. I admire that greatly and respect that greatly about you as well. But I think there's a little room for both. But definitely don't stop planting seeds. I mean, you're dead in the water if that's just what happens, right? So
Right. And it's also like setting the expectation that it does take work usually to accomplish your goals. I think this goes back to the lottery conversation we had, where it's like either of us would be happy winning the lottery, I'm sure, but it's also just, it's not the same feeling as when you've put work into something and you have perfected it and you have made it exactly what you want, and you get that feeling of this is finished. I'm ready to, what we call in the software world, ship it.
Ship it. I like that. I say that in my job too, even though we don't ship anything.
Exactly.
Yeah.
That's the, yes.
I can't remember, some famous guru said ship it. I think it was, there's a branding guru, Seth Godin.
Yeah.
He talks about his motto, ship it, get it done, get it out there, move on, you know.
Yeah, it's a pretty interesting one. I definitely could do this more, I think. Consider the seeds instead of because I get to the end of the night and I'm just like, oh my gosh, I just want it to be tomorrow so I can get more done. Right?
Yeah, that is right.
So what the next part of this?
Oh, we're not shipping the podcast just yet. There's more.
There's more.
Awesome.
So the first part of this, we talked through why we go to the person we go to for advice. Second part of this was to review some of the common advice you can find on the internet and how we feel about it. Third part is to share the best advice you've ever gotten. I need to look mine up real quick.
Go for it, because I need to think mine up real quick.
The best advice that I shouldn't even say this is not advice I've been given. This is advice from the internet that I happen to like a lot. It goes against every piece of advice we just read out loud and reviewed.
Awesome. I can't wait to hear this.
Okay, so this says, it's very simple. Practice like you've never won. Perform like you've never lost. The reason why I like this so much is because it implies you are extremely confident when you are performing, which is what I need. I need to feel that confidence. I also see in the people that I've led in the past and in the kids that I've mentored and stuff like that. Their biggest problem is when they're performing, they start to get self-conscious and then they can't get out of their head. However, this speaks a little bit to consistency and what we talked about earlier, but practicing like you've never won implies that you need to improve so much, that you still have so far to go. But it's a personal thing. It's not competition with anyone else, because if you're performing like you've never lost.
Besting your own best.
Yes. And it implies that you are the best, better than the rest.
That's right.
However, when you're practicing, you just know that you better get better. And I really, really like this. I think that when I think about my team behind the scenes versus my team in front of a customer or in a performance mode, it's a very different vibe that I want to send. It's also interesting because your brother one day was talking about this all together. He was basically talking about how you shouldn't really be humble, and how being humble is like putting yourself beneath somebody else.
Yeah.
And although that's not always the interpretation, this is what he was taking away from this. And it's very similar to me of like, when you're in performance mode, you need the confidence to believe that you are the best. Otherwise it won't work, right?
I completely agree with that. And also, as somebody who's very modest and even, I would say, humble, just it's part of my natural character. When it came to sports or hobbies or interests or career, and when it was time to deliver, I channeled all of my mindset and capability into doing the absolute best I possibly could. And you can still do that in a way that's consistent with your personality. For me, being modest about it, I was the guy that would, to get a hat, not a hat trick, that's hockey, but like, what do they call it in soccer? Where do you get 3 goals or whatever? Or hit a game-winning hit in the bottom of the 9th in baseball or whatever, and I would be completely stoic and everyone would be going nuts and everything, and I was just like, I'm just doing my job, this is what I practice for. But I think it also reminds me of how important mindset is and having belief in yourself. And it reminds me of that, again, that old adage around your thoughts become your actions, become your character, become your destiny. So if you're really clear in your mind about what you foresee and what you can deliver, you're going to more likely manifest that in your performance, right? And so I think that's really inspirational and sound advice.
There's also something to knowing that you put the work in, which I think goes back to that consistency. I think the consistency one bothered me so much because it's more like, this more so hits home for me, where it's like, okay, you can be consistent but still mediocre. Where if you practice like you've never won, then you're being consistent, you're showing up, you're trying to improve, you're figuring things out. Maybe you're looking at the people that you admire in the space that you're talking about, no matter what it is, sports, music, whatever, or even as a female leader, you find that inspiration and you strive for that. And then one day you become that, like you said, like your mindset changes you into that, and then all of a sudden you realize you are the person that other people are looking up to. So it's a pretty cool piece of advice that I like.
Yeah, I like it.
Did you think of anything yourself?
I did. So mine, actually, I've recently been reminded of this. So this comes from a clothespin that I received at a really wonderful and inspirational exhibit to raise awareness for domestic violence run by our friend Kelly. At the end of this exhibit, there was a section around creating light and hope for the future. And you could select all these clothespins that had really positive messages of hope on them. And it was very personal. And the one that I chose was be yourself. And why that resonates with me is, I think, the idea of authenticity and truly being who you are and connecting with yourself is so fundamental and important toward thriving and enjoying life and connecting with others. And we all accrue different impediments along the way through childhood and through life experiences where sometimes you get disconnected or there's a little bit of stuff in the way, and you need to be reminded of how to tune back into who you are and what you want and what you need out of this life and take the agency to make that happen. And so that really resonated with me, and it reminded me of another related piece of advice, and also it probably came from the internet or a book I read. The idea of being yourself. The universe has been around as far as humans can measure it, 13.8 billion years or something, right? And as far as we know, it only created one of each of us, right? So it's like, why would you not want to be yourself? Like, we're all so unique and individual. And Carl Sagan also said, if you want an apple pie, all you have to do is create the universe, right? Like all these things happened in order for us to have this little piece of time in existence. And why not embrace who you are and live freely and enjoy this experience? So be yourself.
I love that, baby. I love that Jonathan has mentioned our friend Kelly, who was my friend first.
Yes. My new friend.
But our friend Kelly runs an exhibit every year called Hope in the Darkness. And it goes along with the book that she wrote called Memoirs of an Invisible Child, which you can find on Amazon. We'll link it below. And it is a book about her personal history. So it is her memoir. She also was very shy as a child and now is not. And she's one of the sweetest people you will ever meet in your life. We joke in my family that she's Mary Poppins. I think she is the most caring, nurturing person I've ever met. If I could be more like anyone, it would be my grandmother or her. So thanks, Kelly, for sharing yourself with us and also for being inspirational, because I think part of this that Jonathan has brought up of being yourself, sometimes you forget who you are, or you have someone in your life, unfortunately, that could even be a parent or a partner or a friend, unfortunately, that is shaming you for who you truly are. And you start to think that who you are is not okay. And like you said, I mean, what are the chances of us being here? Each individual?
Very small.
Very small. And I think it's important to cultivate who we are and choose who we are, but not let somebody else shame us or force us into a mold that we're not meant to fit in. So I love that. Be yourself.
Be yourself.
And then practice like you've never won and perform like you've never lost.
Let's do this.
Well, everyone, we greatly appreciate you watching this. We hope that this one was enjoyable, a little bit more serious this time around. We'll probably switch it up from time to time, and sometimes we'll be silly, sometimes we'll be
serious,
sometimes we'll be creative,
sometimes we'll be ridiculous.
Most of the time we're ridiculous.
True.
But we thank you for watching, and we'll talk to you in the next one.
See ya.
Bye, everyone.